Hi everyone, this is Kim Cantrell. I'm the Project Director of Ability Tools, and I welcome you to this training. I'm going to talk a little bit as they're coming out and coming back in, just also for the people who are joining us, to make sure that you are indeed connected to this webinar. We're really excited because this is a new funding source in California for speech-generating devices through the California Public Utilities Commission. And it began January 1st, 2014, so it's been a little bit over a year that the CPUC has been able to fund speech-generating devices. I'm not going to go into too much detail because our presenters know the program the best and they run it. I'm just kind of wanting to let you know you are on the right call. They're doing a lot of very innovative things, and they see themselves as a funder of last resort, but they are going to explain to you exactly what that means.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Tyrone, and I'm with the California Public Utilities Commission's Communications Division, or CPUC. I am the lead on the CPUC's Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program, or DDTP, Speech Generating Devices, SGD team. Also, I have with me today Jonathan Lackritz, a Program Manager in the Communications Division, and Linda Gustafson, who is a Supervisor with oversight of the DDTP. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to participate in the webinar today. The focus of the webinar will be on the Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program and SGDs, in particular, the funding and application process for those SGDs that are durable medical equipment, or DME. The webinar will also provide a high-level overview of the eligibility requirements, types of equipment offered, as well as an overview of the DDTP in general. Now let's proceed with the DDTP SGD distribution overview. What equipment is covered? Devices identified as durable medical equipment by the United States Department of Health and Human Services are covered. Who can apply? California residents that have been evaluated by a speech-language pathologist, or SLP, and prescribed an SGD by a licensed physician or other medical professional can apply. Let's move on with the distribution overview. The Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program is the funder of last resort, providing partial/full funding after any applicable public or private insurance. SGD equipment must be from a CPUC, California Public Utilities Commission approved SGD vendor for funding. The applicant is the end user of the SGD, and the SGD application process is unique from other DDTP application processes such as CTAP, for those of you who are familiar with it. So how did we get here? How did we get to this point? Assembly Bill AB 136, authored by Senator Bell, Chapter 404, was signed by Governor Brown on October 2nd, 2011. Assembly Bill 136 amends Public Utilities Code, PU Code 2881, to add speech-language pathologists, SLPs, to the list of DDTP certifying agents. It also expands the Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program to include SGDs. It also requires the Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program to be the funder of last resort for SGDs after applicable public and private insurance. And finally, it directs the California Public Utilities Commission, CPUC, to establish SGD implementation rules by January 1st, 2014. Now let's talk about implementation. How did the CPUC implement AB 136? The California Public Utilities Commission opened rulemaking R 13-03-008 in March of 2013 to implement AB 136. The rulemaking was followed by a decision that put in place SGD rules by January 2014 pursuant to AB 136, Chapter 404, 2011, and CPUC Decision 13-12-054, which was issued on December of 2013. The rules for SGDs that are durable medical equipment, or DME, can be found in Attachment A of that decision, which is Decision 13-12-054. Rules for SGDs that are tablets, or supplemental telecommunications equipment, STE, can be found in Attachment B of that decision. Again, that's Decision 13-12-054. The rulemaking 13-03-008 Phase 2 remains open to address additional implementation issues. Moving on to how we got here. Implementation public input. So prior to and throughout the rulemaking process, the CPUC, California Public Utilities Commission, sought public comments from SGD users, speech-language pathologists, and SGD providers. There were SGD forums held in both Northern and Southern California in January 2013. There were also 5 working groups held during the May and June 2013 time period. And lastly, an SGD workshop was held in April of 2014. So let's talk about what type of SGD equipment is funded. The Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program funds SGDs, including the device, accessories, mounting system, and telecommunications component recommended by a speech-language pathologist that are durable medical equipment, or DME. Non-DME SGDs, or SGD tablets, also known as supplemental telecommunications equipment, STEs, is anticipated to be initially distributed separately through a pilot. We are currently in the planning phases of the SGD tablet pilot. This STE, or SGD tablet pilot, is anticipated to be underway by the second quarter of 2015. The SGD tablet pilot will need to be the focus of a separate webinar. Now let's talk about who are these SGD vendors. SGD vendors currently approved to provide equipment through the DDTP are Attainment Company Incorporated, 2, Dynavox Systems, LLC, 3, Forbes Rehab Services Incorporated, 4th, LLC Technologies Incorporated, 5th, Lingraphic Care America Incorporated, 6th, PRC, or Premke Ramik Company, including Saltillo. 7th, we have Tobii ATI Assistive Technologies Incorporated. And 8th, we have Words Plus Incorporated. Now, it should be noted that Dynavox Systems and Tobii ATI are in the process of merging or have merged, and that's not reflected on this list. The current SGD vendors and SGD equipment are posted on the CPUC website. This list can be found at www.cpuc.ca.gov by searching for SGDs in the search field. Now let's move on to, searching for speech generating devices. Now let's move on to eligibility. Who is eligible? California residents requiring an SGD for access to and use of the telephone network who have been assessed by a speech-language pathologist and whose SGD expenses that are not otherwise covered by public, for example, Medicare and Medi-Cal, or private insurance. For example, if an applicant's only available source of funding is Medicare, and Medicare covers 80% of the cost for an SGD, the applicant may apply to the CPUC's Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program for funding of the remaining 20%. Now, how does one apply? The Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program SGD application can be downloaded by searching for speech generating devices at www.cpuc.ca.gov. Next, print out the application and complete all applicable fields working with a speech-language pathologist and SGD vendor as appropriate. So what's the first step in applying? What do I need to do before completing this application? First, you need to obtain a written evaluation report from a speech-language pathologist. Next steps. Number 1, work with a speech-language pathologist and SGD vendor to complete the SGD application package, including identifying applicable public and private insurance. Number 2, the SGD vendor approved by the California Public Utilities Commission provides a quote for the speech-language pathologist recommended SGD. And third, identify the unfunded amount requested from the DDTP. Now let's talk about the application details. And for those of you with online access, you might want to pull down the application as we discuss. So completing and submitting the Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program SGD application. The application contains 8 sections, 5 of which are to be completed by the applicant working with a speech-language pathologist and SGD vendor as required. Sections 1 through 3 requires the applicant/guardian and SLP signature. Section 4 requires identification of who is responsible for setup of the SGD and related equipment. Section 5 requires the signature of the applicant/guardian identifying the amount of funds requested from the Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program. Also, submit an authorization for release of information letter and release letter to SGD provider / manufacturer to the SGD provider. These documents are part of the application, SGD application package for funding. So once the application is completed, what's next? Submitting the application. Where should I send the completed application to? It's to be sent to California Public Utilities Commission, attention, Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program, DDTP, Speech Generating Device Application, Communications Division, 505 Van Ness Avenue, San Francisco, California, 94102. Now let's move on to additional documents required and checking in on the status. So what should I do after I've submitted the DDTP SGD application? Check your mailbox for application receipt acknowledgement letter from the CPUC. After approval of the application, coordinate delivery and setup of the SGD with the speech language pathologist, SGD provider, or others as necessary. So let's say during the process of completing the application, some questions come up, clarification is needed. Who do I contact if I have questions? For any questions concerning your application, you can call 800-900-3985, or you can send an email to dddtp-application@cpuc.ca.gov. So to get an idea of how many applications we've received so far, to date, we've received 66 SGD applications and approved over 56 of them. And we started accepting applications as of February 2014. So now, I'd like to talk about the DDTP program in general. What other equipment and services does the Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program provide? The Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program serves people who are challenged using a standard telephone because of difficulty seeing, hearing, speaking, moving, or remembering. Access to assistive telecommunications devices, relay, and Deaf and Disabled Telecommunications Program equipment provides persons with disabilities ongoing access to the telecommunications network, including 911 and other emergency services in the event of an emergency. Without these specialized devices and services, these individuals may have no other means to access 911 and emergency services, or to make medical or other safety impacting calls, since they are unable to use a standard telephone. CRS, or California Relay Service, enables persons who are deaf, hearing impaired, or speech disabled to make medical and other safety impacting calls. CRS includes visually assisted speech-to-speech service. That concludes the webinar, and now I will open up the floor to questions that anyone may have. Okay, and I see a question here concerning how long does the approval take after the paperwork has been submitted? Assuming you have all of the necessary paperwork. As I mentioned earlier, I have Linda Gustafson with me. I'm going to defer that question to her.
So in a nutshell, when we're reviewing an application, it involves not only the initial information that we are provided from the applicant, but also the assessment from the speech-language pathologist. And if we have to ask for additional information from the speech-language pathologist, we follow up with that. And in addition, we need the information from the vendor. If in fact we have a complete package, and sometimes this does take us, well, usually it does take us requesting additional information from either the SLP or the vendor, then we send out an email, an acknowledgement letter, well, actually the acknowledgement letter goes after we've received the application. We let the applicant, the SLP, and the SGD provider know that we will be getting back to them with any additional information that we require. Then usually we work with the vendor on the actual quote that is required. And once we actually have a complete package, then we send out what we call a funding letter. It identifies that we have reviewed and approved the applicant for funding. And then so from that perspective, that can be relatively quick, or it might take a little bit of time. And we target trying to process this kind of thing within the month of having received it. Then what happens is our procurement people issue what is called a purchase order to the vendor. The vendor, in some instances, then requires a couple of weeks to assemble the SGD prior to shipment to the applicant. There is a question from Mary Johnson as, do we need a formal denial letter from Medicare in order to get an undedicated open SGD? If the applicant is in a long-term care facility and only has access to a mobile phone, can they still apply? Okay, so it sounds like we have, I guess, two questions from Mary Johnson. One is our program is basically the funder of last resort after applicable public or private insurance. So if we receive an application for an individual, so we have a formal denial letter from Medicare. I think that's not a problem. If Medicare will not fund it, then and there is no other insurance, then I anticipate that an application could be submitted, and that we would then fund that device, assuming we have the necessary paperwork from the speech-language pathologist. So that's that first question from Mary Johnson. The second question is, if the applicant is in a long-term care facility and only has access to a mobile phone, can they still apply? I guess that's kind of a two-part question. One is, and I don't know if we're talking about the same individual who is Medicare, oftentimes Medicare will not fund if the individual is in the skilled nursing facility. So we would anticipate has only access to a mobile phone. I don't see that necessarily as a constraint. If the SLP and the SGD vendor see more complexity to a particular application than what they have processed or request to be processed in the past, sometimes we do pre-review. And so what you would do then is send an email to the email, the DDTP, -SGD application, and best would be that it would be the SLP and the SGD provider indicate that you wanted to do an initial review of application that has a bit more complexity, and then we would attempt to address issues on a case-by-case basis. We have a question from someone named Debbie, who apparently joined us late. She's asking about specific pieces of equipment. What I would ask that she do is go to the website of the Commission, the California Public Utilities Commission. That's www.cpuc.ca.gov, and search speech generating devices. And on that website, there would be a list of the vendors who are currently approved as SGD vendors for DDTP funding, and also a list of their equipment. Then we have another question from Denise 1. Does the funding cover any peripherals such as switches or mouse? The funding covers not only the device, but accessories, mounting system, telecommunications component. Again, if you go to that same website, you'll see the various things that are included. And if they aren't currently included by those vendors, then we are working with vendors to add equipment. The question is from Marilyn Buselich. Can you continue to collect data on how many applications, how many approved for funding, and how long the process takes from start to finish? We, of course, do this internally. I think, as Dr. Buselich knows, some of the types of challenges we have experienced in the process are not unique to us. They are changes in the industry. I think that probably everybody on this conference call recognizes that in April of 2014, Medicare had additional changes involving the Medicare cap rental. So, of course, for our own internal processes, we continue to identify when we received an application, how long it takes us for funding. Our processes, of course, involve not only getting all information that we require from the speech-language pathologist, the applicant, and the SGD provider, but it also requires us having internal processes in place. So in some cases, we've had to go back and have to, with our control agencies, to essentially get addendums to our contracts to accommodate the new Medicare requirements, for instance, the Medicare cap rental. But yes, we do attempt to identify, we have that one report from July 31st, and I understand that Dr. Buselich is probably interested in an update. Okay. There's a question from Amy Roman. If a patient owns a tablet and an assessment by an SLP determines that the best communication solution is AAC software app, can this software be funded as an optimal, less expensive option? Unfortunately, at this point in time, our processes, based on our contracting requirements, state contracting procurement process associated with the durable medical equipment, requires us to basically fund based on this list of approved vendors who all have contracts with the state of California and their posted equipment lists. However, separately, what we are doing is, and this was directed by the Commission decision, the rulemaking that Tyrone identified earlier, and is on the Commission's website under that area of speech generating devices. We are looking to pilot and actively planning a pilot that involves what we call a speech generating device tablet pilot, and in that area we are we anticipate, as Tyrone said, it would have to be the subject of another webinar at this point, but we do anticipate taking a look at a range of type of software that might be procured, and some of that would be based on recommendations from SLPs and some from AT professionals. I'm sorry, it says, will these tablets include Windows as well as Android, since iPads are not accessible to most patients with ALS? Well, thank you for that additional information. We anticipate at this point in time our initial focus will probably be iPads, but it is really good information that you have provided us, and that might, and since we are still in the planning stages, it's something else we might consider. As Tyrone and the SGD team, myself, have discussed with a number of the vendors and a number of speech-language pathologists and some SGD users, this whole program continues to be one where we are trying to make sure that our processes are able to adjust to some of the changes that we see or experience in the industry. And I know that different SLPs and different SGD vendors sometimes have different client bases. So if there is additional information that you think it would be useful for us to be aware of, I would encourage you to go ahead and reach out to that DDTP hyphen SGD dash application at cpuc.ca.gov and provide us that additional input. Are there additional questions at this point?
Hi, yeah, this is David. I'm with Access to Independence in San Diego. I've got actually somebody that, as I was in the process of attending this webinar, has asked me about the devices, and I asked about the follow-up on being able to get the PowerPoint, because there's obviously a lot of data within the PowerPoint. But the SLP, the language pathologist, this is a brand new thing for me, and the person just asked. He wants to be able to deal with conversations and stuff. How do I approach him with what's going on other than just by presenting basically this application process, but how can I share with him what it is, or guide him in the right direction, I guess?
I guess I'm not quite clear on the question. Are you a speech-language pathologist, or you have a client? I'm not quite sure on your question.
Okay, no, I'm an assistive technologies consumer coordinator at Access to Independence, and I have a person that's asking about being able to get a hold of AAC, who is, I mean, he's actually a board member of Access to Independence, and he wants to be able to input more because his speech is so weak. He has trouble, and he just emailed me this while I was watching this webinar, and so I'm going, okay, now what's the shortcut, because I have not spoke to him about working with a speech pathologist, and just kind of curious where we start if that's the case.
Okay, so this is Linda speaking. Our legislation directed us essentially be to the funder of last resort, and what an initial step is for the individual to have been assessed by a speech-language pathologist who affirms that the individual requires a speech-generating device to access and use the telephone network. So I'm thinking, so this is a formalized process, and this is for those SGDs that are durable medical equipment. So that may not be the best answer for your question, but unfortunately the process that this webinar is addressing is that more formalized process required for funding for SGDs, which are durable medical equipment, and that's after applicable public or private insurance. I don't know if there's somebody else who has a comment in the chat that would be or might be responsive to this question.
I think I can probably work through it all with just the copy of the PowerPoint, because there's so much information on this PowerPoint. There's no way I could copy it all.
Okay, and I would encourage you to visit the Commission's website and just search speech-generating devices, because that has the application there, and it also has a report that was done in July of last year, which identifies the first 6 months or so of experience of the program. I see that there's another question here from someone named Debbie, and the question is there an age limit or younger age limit for this program? And what I would suggest that you do is you take a look at that July 31st report that's posted on the website. What we have not identified an age limit. However, we are anticipating the speech-language pathologist that has done the assessment will be able to affirm that the individual is requiring the equipment to access and use the telephone network. And to the extent that the assessment is a bit dated, or is not specific to this, then we oftentimes do ask the speech-language pathologist for a letter of additional information addressing this. Okay, and so somebody said with respect to the other gentleman's question is refer him to a speech-language pathologist. Okay, are there additional questions here? Okay, somebody thought we had an excellent webinar. I think we have an excellent audience, and we apologize for some of the technical glitches. We tried to iron them out in advance, but I guess that's the nature of things. I do have to say that for us this has been a complex area. We continue to work with trying to improve our processes internally. And so any additional thoughts you might have, if you send that to our email box, the DDTP sgd-application@cpuc.ca.gov. We do attempt to be responsive. But in any event, we want to thank everybody for their support on this. I know there are some people on the call who basically were with us in that 2012 era prior to the January 2013 area, and we in the public forums, and so we really want to thank everybody for their support throughout all of this.